Okay.
So my name is Donna Chayet. I use she, her pronouns. And I entered the world of adoption 18 years ago when my daughter was born. She's from Guatemala, and I adopted her from Guatemala when she was 6 months old. And she had 3 mental health crises in her life. One when she was 6 years old, one when she was in 6th grade, and then one when she was 16. So clearly it's the number 6. That's the issue here. And in the first mental health crisis, when she was 6 years old, I was really able to rationalize, justify, minimize, blamed it on the school, blamed it on the community, blamed it on people not understanding her or me. And, you know, I got her some intervention. She recouped. Things seemed to be going good. And then in 6th grade, things got really problematic. She really stopped functioning like a middle school student. I reached out for support. I found Barbara, and I attended her groups for parents of adopted children. It was a game changer for me. In addition to being an adoptive parent, I'm an educator. I have multiple certifications in sex and sexuality, drug and alcohol, mental health first aid. I'm really well educated in this topic. I'm an attorney. I worked in the field of intimate partner violence. I understand trauma on a very deep level. And, you know, I thought I had it all there, but I didn't. And after working with Barbara for a number of years, I reached out to her and said, I think there are some pieces from the educational field and these interrelated fields that I'm an expert in. And I think if we join forces, we can create something really special. So for the past 2 years, we've been collaborating and running groups for older teens and adults, young adults. And it's been wonderful and fascinating. And I'm so looking forward to sharing with you some of the insights we've gleaned over these past 2 years.
Thanks, Donna. That's a great introduction. I'm Barbara Friedgood. I'm a social worker. I have 2 adult children who I adopted at birth. My son is 20. My daughter is 22 now. We made it to adulthood. It was also a rocky road, and there were mental health crises and addiction and lots of struggles. But I'm happy to say that everyone's in a good place at this point. When I did the interview with Shameen, the video, she asked me, what got you into this? And I said, my children. I wanted to figure out a way to help them and to understand them. And out of doing that, I started doing my parent groups. And now I have numerous parent groups going both in New York City and in Woodstock, New York. And I love this work because it's so close to home. It's so close to my heart. So
wonderful. So
I'll let you start.
Yeah, great. So Barbara and I are going to kind of tag team. I'm going to do the first 8 slides. Barbara's going to do the second 8 slides. Grounding and centering exercises, taking nice deep breaths. If people are really feeling deep emotions or uneasy feelings, let us know. One of the reasons why I want people on Zoom is I love using the timeout signal. If we need to slow down, if I say something that doesn't land well with someone, call me in, call me out. We want to have an open discussion. I'm not perfect. I sometimes use language that might not sit well with people. Tell me, we're all grown-ups, I can listen. Questions or support can go through the chat. Again, the top half of the program, reach out to Barbara. The second bottom half of the program, reach out to me. We're going to stop the slide presentation. Every few slides, we're going to check in. We're going to do our best to make this really interactive and meet the needs of this particular group. In putting this presentation together, we decided what makes most sense is to blend theory with pragmatic skill building. And so the theory we're going to look at is the adoption paradigm, the 7 core issues, 8 losses, and this idea of running unrescue missions with our older teens and adult children and what that means. We're going to go through a vignette. We're going to do some interactive role playing. This is all copyrighted. It's all under development. If anyone is interested in using it or is going to grab some screen shares. Just let us know how you're going to use it, and please make sure to give us credit for that. So here are the essential questions that we're going to be asking and hopefully answering. So can we get new understandings? Can we look at these frameworks? And I really want to make it clear to people, Barbara and I aren't here to pathologize adoption. We want to create nuance and complexity. And these frameworks that we're going to talk about at the top half of the program are just that. And then once we have these understandings, how does that translate to reduction of trauma symptoms, reduction of internalized blame and shame? How do we boost recovery and resilience in everyone who's impacted by adoption? And even though what we're going to be talking about today, there's some hard truths to adoption. Let's try and really focus again on the complexity, that there's these uneasy, hard truths that happen with adoption and those impacted in the adoption constellation, but there's also hope and optimism. So now that we've done a little introing of where we're going and laying down a frame for you all, I'm really curious who's in the room. So let me know if you're a parent. If you are, let us know the age of your child. If you're a healthcare professional, let us know if you work with a specific group within the adoption constellation. And then my third question is, I threw out adoption paradigm, 7 core issues, 8 specific losses, unrescue mission. Are you familiar with those concepts or ideas? Great. So far, 2 parents, a social worker in foster care. Great. Another parent. Karen is just Zoom bombing us. Welcome. Great. Great. So it looks like we have a pretty even mix of parents and professionals. So we're going to do our best to thread the needle, right? If we're not, let us know. Barbara and I are very light on our feet, and we've presented to both groups. This will be my first group where we're really blending both communities. So everyone, we'll do our best. So this is my take and my visual of the adoption paradigm. I'll just give you all a moment to read around. Start at the top at 12 o'clock and move to 11. There's a little bit of a process in it. When I met with Barbara, and my daughter was working with an adoption specialist when she was in 6th grade, this phrase adoption paradigm was used a lot. I had a real sixth sense and instinct around it because I'm an educator and I understand paradigms. And it took me until putting this presentation together to really kind of suss out what I think other people meant, and certainly how it landed on me and how Barbara and I now use it in our group. So there are a lot of people at this conference who are talking about trauma, like Bruce Perry, who are notable people. They're probably going to do an amazing job about the trauma piece. We're going to spend the next 6 slides on these 7 core issues. And we think that's part of the paradigm. The paradigm includes everyone impacted. It includes what happened in utero. It includes what happened in the country or location pre-utero. It includes the child's unique stamp, genetic temperament, personality. It includes their early lived experiences. It includes their early experiences in our families, where there might be all sorts of stuff going on that deeply impacts them. My daughter's first crisis at 6 was when my mother passed away. That loss for her was more traumatic than the loss for me. The adoption constellation takes into account the fact that many adopted families don't look like typical families. We butt up against the notion. We're queer, we're single, we're bicultural, transnational. We have biological children and adopted children. We're not typical, we're different. Yay. And then the biggest lens to look at the adoption paradigm is this idea that adoption is a problem-solving event, that it is almost always born out of deep, deep pain, and that it is impacted by systemic injustice in this world. And I literally mean the world. My daughter adopted from Guatemala. Peace Accords are signed in 1996. She's born in 2003. She's a product of a post-traumatic country. And understanding that for me, and then having her understand that deep place of pain that her family members experience is critical for her journey and my journey with her and her family's journey. So I could spend an hour, Barbara and I can spend an hour on the adoption paradigm. I moved through it quickly. It's not complete. It wasn't designed to be complete. Is there anyone who would like to raise their hand and share how that landed on people? Is this a new idea for you to kind of put this, the opposite of simplicity is the adoption paradigm?
I'd like you to talk a little bit about, I forgot what number it was, but adoption as a product of loss.
We're going to talk more about that, Chester. That's coming. Yeah.
Been one of my things that I've been banging my head against walls about. People accepting that it's an impulse, it's a lost impulse. I can't wait to get to that. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's coming really soon. Yeah.
Coming in the next slide, actually. Whenever I teach, I always have one person, and you may be at Chester, and I always say, you're 2 slides ahead of me. Just, there we go. So that's who you are. Anyone else? Comment, question, did that land? Is it new? Does it help to see it all in one place? Yeah.
Well, I just want to say something to what you said, Chester, about this feeling of banging your head against the wall. I often get a reaction where people will say to me, you're being so negative about adoption. And I think if we can tell the truth about adoption, we can be more positive about it, and we can have more positive outcomes. Right. Yeah.
Agreed. Anyone else? I saw some head nodding. Michelle, you nodded your head when I said, did it help to see it in one place? Do you want to elaborate on that thought or feeling? Or you can shake your head no and say, no, Donna, I was complete. My head nod was a complete sentence.
Well, it's mostly I'm a very visual person, so that the circle part of it, and it also, you know, the stages and the people, but it makes it a whole person, and I like how it actually does help me look at it through the positive lens.
Exactly. And some of you may note, I have a brilliant sister who's my business partner. And as I was having her run through these slides with me, and she said, oh, go back to the one that's the compass. Mm-hmm. And I went, oh, that's interesting. I didn't even realize it was a compass. And I think that was really unconscious on my part, that like you, I'm very visual. And this is kind of you know, where is our North Star here? Right? You know, where do we ground ourselves? Where do we center ourselves? How do we hold all of this at once in this world of complexity? All right, Chester, here you go for you. I designed this one just for you. So Barbara and I won't take credit for this. I'm going to give credit where it's due to researchers and experts in the field of adoption in 1982. Published and I'll give you the site in a moment, a very short paper on the 7 core issues of adoption. And the central part is loss. Moving again at 12, we have rejection, guilt and shame, grief, identity, intimacy, mastery, and control. This visual was a conscious choice. I specifically wanted everyone to see that each of these are interconnected. They relate to one another. If I were a good enough graphic designer, I'd have arrows and lines connecting these to one another. And what's interesting is that it all starts with loss, and you can see the developmental stages of infancy, early childhood, early adolescence, late adolescence, and adulthood in these. Moving around in this counterclockwise direction. And what Barbara and I have noticed is that even though this travels the lifespan through early adulthood, 25 to 30, each of the members of the constellation go through this process.
Yeah, it's not just the adopted person. It's the adoptive parents and the birth family also.
And that different moments in life will trigger, for lack of a better word, I don't mean that necessarily in a traumatic way, but will evoke one of these coming up more profoundly. And the way it's really been impactful in our groups is when, as a parent, and Barbara as a clinician, for those of you who are clinicians, when you're going, banging your head against the wall, going, I don't understand. This behavior doesn't match my child. It doesn't match me, my values. I'm behaving in a way that seems off or not the vision I had of what I wanted to be as a parent. We can often strip away and find these 7 core issues. They become another North Star. We're going to go through each one individually. So there's the site, the American Adoption Congress. So I'm going to read you this, and then Barbara and I will give some insight. And for this slide and this slide only, for the central one, the central issue of loss, we're going to do an interactive exercise. And then for the rest, we'll just run through them and let you do that exercise on your own. Of course, please share in the chat. Loss is central. Loss in adoption is not a single occurrence. There's the initial identifiable loss and innumerable secondary sub-losses, innumerable, countless. Loss becomes an evolving process, creating a theme of loss in both the individual's and family development. Loss impacts normal, healthy development. And we find I just got stuck. We find ourselves and our families, and we're stuck. We get stuck in patterns and behaviors. So what I'm going to do is take the slide off. And again, hands up volunteering. I'm curious how you think this loss shows up for the adopted person. Obviously the initial loss, but where are the innumerable other losses? How does it show up for the birth parent, who is often ignored in the adoption constellation? And then how does it show up for those of us in the room who are adopted parents? And when we're done with that little brainstorm, we'll show you what Silverstein and Kaplan wrote about those losses. Yes, Cynthia.
It shows up for the adoptee. They lost their right to their birth parents and their genetic knowledge, but they've also lost their right to future generations. So my son has lost the ability to have his children interact with his nieces and nephews. And then for the birth parent, they lose the option, the chance to have a connection with their grandchildren. And my mother lost that. So you thought it was just here, but it's that generational loss that goes out all over the place. So, and for the adoptive parent, did you want the adoptive parent too?
Go for it. You're knocking it out of the ballpark.
Yeah, sure.
Been in this a little while. So the adoptive parent lost the right to parent their own genetic child, and they have to mourn that loss through. And they also, I guess that's the only one I came up for the adoptive parent. That's when I'm not, but yeah. But as a foster youth, I was also a foster youth. We lost the ability to mourn the loss of our parent being involved in our life throughout and continue in that connection.
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. That's really beautifully said. Chester, I see your hand.
I think it shows up across the board for everybody repeatedly as shame.
Yes.
And that's the thing that comes back again and again and again and again. The message to everybody in the triad is, this is shameful, you are shameful, you should be ashamed, it's a shame.
Mhm.
I think that's the most powerful and the most damaging of all of them to everybody.
I think that's right. And that's the third core issue, as we're going to go through each one of them, but guilt and shame are after it's loss, rejection, guilt and shame. Obviously, these issues are fluid. It's not like you feel one at a time and then you're done. They interact through life, which is why I like the spiral, because you keep coming around the spiral to these issues again and again as you go through life. But I think the guilt and shame comes very much from we all feel that what's happened to us is somehow our responsibility. And I think particularly it's a very American thing, it's a very Western thing to, think we're responsible for everything, even though we might not be.
Right. Any other adoptive? There are a lot of adoptive parents out there. Yeah, Annette.
Sorry, I'm going to do from the adoptee standpoint.
Right.
We lost the right to genetic mirroring, seeing who we look like, who we don't look like. And that's generational. That's just completely generational from our ancestors to, descendants. We also lost the right to our original identity in many states. In 41 states, an adult adoptee cannot obtain a true original unredacted certified copy of their original birth certificate. So our original identity is completely hidden from us. And that was something that was always important to me. What was my name before I was Annette?
Thank you. Beautifully said. Any parents want to speak about their loss? All right.
I think I would.
Yeah. I can say something about loss as an adoptive parent, and I think it depends on the circumstances of the adoption. But having adopted an older child out of foster care, I lost all of his early years. I lost the ability to be part of forming my child's life from the very beginning. And I know some families choose adoption because maybe of issues of infertility. They may be feeling the loss of being able to have a biological child. So those are just a couple.
Yeah.
For me, I'll speak personally. I lost the fantasy of what it would be like to parent a child who was typical. And I'm parenting a child who has special needs, specific needs. And that was very jarring to me. I was desperate to make sure my child was typical, and she wasn't and isn't.
I can completely relate to that. We adopted a sibling group of 4. Their ages 12, 11, 7, and and 5 right now. And we, we joke about it, but we essentially lost our lives. Our lifestyle is nowhere near what it used to be, and because we just have so much more focus on the meeting the needs of the children, getting them to their appointments, making sure that they have the things that they need, so that we actually get what we need in the end, which is hopefully the promise that they may be able to someday live independently. That's our goal. And so we're putting all of our energy into that. But while we're doing that, we're not doing the things that we used to do for pleasure. We're not going on cruises. We're not going, hiking. We're not, having a picnic in the park on a Saturday. There are just some things that we used to be able to do that we just can't. So there is a huge sense of loss there.
Barbara, do your favorite quote about the job of adoptive parents.
Well, I firmly believe that being an adoptive parent is a different job from being a biological parent. It's a much harder job. I think you're called upon to do what I call therapeutic parenting, right? It's not, first of all, you're stretching across a bridge to understand someone who more likely than not is very different from you, different biology, different talents, gifts from your own, and who comes with this major loss at the center. So I think adoptive parenting is a very different job, and many people will try to tell you, oh, you're a parent like any other parent, and that's it. But you're dealing with so much more.
Oh, for sure. I saw a comment that popped up and said, when you made this choice, you knew what you were getting into, kind of a thing. The reality is, we didn't. It was layers of an onion. So what I would say is that a lot of times local departments of social services will, and this is kind of a funny way to put it, but they'll spit shine the kids, and they'll make them look all pretty and dress them in nice clothing and say he likes to play in the park, and this one likes trucks, and this one does this, and so you say, okay, yeah, I'm pretty sure we can handle all that, but then you don't realize that you're facing a series of children with multiple disabilities, because that's not how they sell it. So it's very much like a used car salesman, where it's kind of like, oh, this one will get you an extra 100,000 miles, and the reality is, you don't know what you're getting into. Parenting is parenting, and parenting a biological child, you can have a neurotypical biological child or a non-neurotypical biological child, but ultimately, when you are parenting children that come from hard places, it is a really different type of situation.
Well, and I think most adoptive parents, and I would imagine a lot of people in this group would agree, are not at all prepared for what they've taken on. They are. I think one of the great failures of the adoption system and the business of adoption is that nobody's properly educated about some of the things that we're talking about here today, the loss of so many things on all sides, and how that's going to play out in a family. That's going to impact everybody.
Great. And, I'm seeing lovely comments. And one of the things that would be amazing is, of course, to have an open debate and conversation. But I want to move on with the program, because we do want to get to some role plays and some more specific skill building if possible.
Yeah, it's a great group. Thanks for participating. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Participation. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So let me share what Silverstein and Kaplan wrote. So the adopted person, the ultimate loss, they fear the ultimate loss of abandonment. They've lost their genetic, biological, and cultural history, leading to issues of holding and letting go. The birth parents ruminate about the lost child. Their initial loss merges with other life events, leading to social isolation, changes in body, self-image, and relationship loss. And then the adoptive parents, if they came to adoption through infertility, it's equated with loss of self and immortality. And then issues of entitlement lead to fear of loss and overprotection. And I thought that issues of entitlement I can really relate to. As a white middle-class parent, I felt I was entitled to be a parent. And that adoption was the root to that. And that was not the truth. I'm a single parent, and I shouldn't be entitled to anything. Right on, Annette. It was a, again, a slight digression, but, I look back on it, and again, I've been involved in social justice, and I could have had a V8 really knocked me in the head when I realized that I participated in an unjust system. And yes, the transactional nature of it is something I don't know if I feel shame about, but I think about a lot. So what we're going to do now is go through these other losses. I'm going to pass it over to Barbara. We're not going to do the exercise, but in your mind, as Barbara's reading, think about the constellation.
Okay, yeah, and I'm going to read each of these, but I'm also going to talk about them after I read them. So, and it, feel free to put comments in the chat, and we'll hopefully have a little time at the end to talk. So the next issue is rejection. Feelings of loss are exacerbated by keen feelings of rejection. One way individuals seek to cope with loss is to personalize it. Triad members attempt to decipher what they did or did not do that led to the loss. Triad members become sensitive to the slightest hint of rejection, causing them either to avoid situations where they might be rejected or to provoke rejection in order to validate their earlier negative self-perceptions. Adoptees, even at young ages, grasp the concept that to be chosen means first that one was unchosen, reinforcing adoptees' lowered self-concept. And with this core issue, I always go back to something my son said to me when he was about 17. He said, I push people away because I was pushed away. So rather than risk getting too close, better to reject and not risk another loss. Right? Okay, Chester, here's yours, guilt and shame. The entire constellation is deserving of rejection. The shame of an unplanned pregnancy or the crisis of infertility or the shame of having been given up remains unspoken, often as an unconscious motivator. And I think there's some obvious guilt and shame where the human mind seems to go to this notion that we're responsible for everything that's happened to us and we've done something bad or wrong if something bad has happened to us. Not necessarily true. But I think there's a more nuanced, and since one of the things we're going for here is nuance, thought about guilt and shame, which is I think a lot of adoptive parents feel guilt and shame about the difficult circumstances of their kids. And perhaps also their sense of entitlement. They were entitled to be parents, and by adopting their children, they have in some way caused some pain, by being a part of this loss. And I think one of the vulnerabilities there is that adoptive parents can overcompensate and rescue, which we're going to get to further along in this presentation. And that is a way of crippling our children. It doesn't help our children to feel strong on their feet. So it wraps around some difficult things. Okay. Next one, Donna.
I think I did it. Is it not showing up for you all?
Yeah, agree. Yeah. Okay. The losses in adoption, however, are difficult to mourn in a society where adoption is seen as a problem-solving event filled with joy. There are no rituals to bury the unborn children, no rites to mark off the loss of role of caretaking parents, no ceremonies for lost dreams or unknown families. Grief washes over triad members' lives, particularly at times of subsequent loss or developmental transitions. And you have a great example of that in what Donna mentioned about her daughter having her first real emotional breakdown at age 6 when she lost her grandmother. That loss triggered the earlier losses. And I think, often the loss of someone important can be very triggering of the grief that's there all the time. Identity, and again, to go back to the idea that Donna was talking about before, that these issues follow developmental stages. Identity is one of the fundamental developmental tasks of adolescence, and in adolescence, you see a lot of issues that are related to identity really blossom. Triad members often express feelings related to confused identity and identity crises, particularly at times of unrelated loss. Identity is defined both by what one is and what one is not. Adoption, for some, precludes a complete or integrated sense of self. Triad members may experience themselves as incomplete, deficient, or unfinished. They state that they lack feelings of well-being, integration, or solidity associated with a fully developed identity. So who am I? Who am I? And then intimacy, again, follows from this feeling of, getting too close can cause another loss, right? If I get close to you and I lose you, that's going to be devastating. The multiple ongoing losses in adoption, coupled with feelings of rejection, shame, and grief, as well as an incomplete sense of self, may impede the development of intimacy for triad members. One maladaptive way to avoid possible reenactment of previous losses is to avoid closeness and commitment. Adoptive parents report that their adopted children seem to hold back on a part of themselves in the relationship. Many adoptees as teens state that they truly have never felt close to anyone. Some youngsters declare a lifetime of emptiness related to a longing for the birth mother they may have never seen. Bonding and attachment issues, especially for older adoptees. I have mixed feelings about that one. I think a lot of adopted families are very securely and well attached. And I think that these issues can still be floating around. Sometimes I think they're so attached that it's terrifying to lose your adoptive family. I know it's sometimes hard for adopted kids to leave home. And then mastery and control. And my daughter has taught me how well I've had to negotiate this one, because throughout her growing up, I would have to say to her, you might want to do this, so that she didn't feel I was trying to control her. And now she says it to me. I think an important thing to remember about all adopted people is that they had no say in the most fundamental decision of their lives, and that is who the family was that they were going to grow up in and being placed for adoption. And so any way in which they can feel more in control and more mastery of things, I think is going to exert itself strongly. And I hear from a lot of parents, my kid really has a will. So those are the 7 core issues. And what I find most useful about them is when I'm dealing with a problem with anyone who's part of adoption, I take it as a lens and put it on top of the problem and say, okay, which issue is really speaking the most right here? And how can we think about it in terms of these issues? Which issue is it? Is it guilt and shame? Is it rejection? Is it mastery and control? What's going on here? And it's so helpful in identifying behaviors and helping to speak to the child about what's really going on, or the person, if they're an adult.
So one of the things when Barbara and I have done this presentation, one of the things that we get is people raise their hand and say, well, all people face these 7 issues. This isn't unique to adoption. This is unique to the human experience. And the answer is yes, these 7 issues are integral to many people's lived experience. However, the keenness, the intensity, the overwhelming nature, the fact that they intercept an ability to function in life. One comment, that they thought, people find themselves in all of these maladaptive behaviors that hurt them, hurt others. That's what we're talking about here, is something that's outside of the norm of what other people might experience. Someone also made the point on the chat that biological families that have children with disabilities or are non-neurotypical, also those parents also experience loss. Yes, absolutely. They also have a very unique experience in parenting. And I've actually found some of my best allies in the, lower school, middle school, upper school challenges that we had. Some of the parents who really helped me were parents who have children who have other disabilities or specific needs. They were a tremendous resource to me. So just want to put that out there. All right. Perfect on timing. We've got 20 minutes to now start diving deeper into the specifics. And I hope everyone understands that the way this presentation was designed, we start with this larger understanding of the paradigm, move into 7 core issues that the entire constellation feels and experiences. And now we're moving into really focusing in even deeper into loss.
So Katie Nasker, who wrote a wonderful book that I highly recommend called Parenting in the Eye of the Storm, I forget the subtitle, Parenting Your Adopted Teen, breaks down loss into 8 component parts. And we put them up here for you. So there's a loss of continuity, of safety, of control, of closure, of trust in adults, innocence, worth, and accountability. So again, a more nuanced thinking about all the different ways in which the loss manifests. And she also talks about these 4 key concepts in dealing with teenagers, which is where we're trying to put our focus today. Unrescuing your adopted teen, where we're going to focus today. Setting adoption sensitive limits, having connected conversations, and helping your teen envision their future. And I highly recommend her book to expand on the latter 3, but we're gonna focus on unrescuing. So being rescued is the narrative of adoptees. They had no control over the situation from which they were rescued. They are drawn to it perhaps as a way to work through and integrate their experience, but it is also scary because it leaves them powerless with no voice and no agency. Adoptive parents tend to rescue to try and compensate for their child's losses and pain. And when we do that, of course, it's just crippling.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to put a fact pattern out to you, a little vignette, and we are going to workshop how you might specifically problem solve a vignette like this.
Okay. So I'm going to read the vignette and then we'll all jump in with thoughts about how you might not rescue, but help your child through the situation. Your child has asked for an extravagant end of school year present because COVID was so hard for them. You agreed that if they passed all of their classes, you would get this extravagant present. They didn't. They failed one and barely passed the others, and you said no to the gift. They are now threatening to hurt themselves, not go to college, binge drink, or whatever substance of choice if you don't buy them the gift. And they have made it clear that you have never really loved them. So let's go back to these options and look at how we would problem solve this.
Right. So this is the roadmap.
So these are questions that help slow things down and slow down your thinking. And I think that's one of the most important things when things get elevated. If you can stop and think and not react, you have much better outcomes. And it helps to have a map to use for your thinking. So the first question would be, is this an exception or a pattern, part of a pattern? So when the child doesn't get what they want, if someone's saying this vignette sounds exactly like my son, sounds familiar. Yeah, we tried to make it realistic. So how do you want everyone to participate on this, Donna, or do you want to just have me workshop it?
why don't you workshop this first one? And then I'm loving this group. I think this group is going to put something in the chat that we can workshop together after you've kind of gone through this process.
Okay, I'll let you keep an eye on that.
Oh,
So-
you bet I will.
Okay. Is this an exception or a pattern? I would say that this is a pattern that I encountered. I remembered my daughter being completely adamant that I didn't love her enough because I wouldn't buy her a $900 saddle for her horse, or a horse that she was riding, not her horse, which was, just crazy. So if it's a pattern, you don't want to just give in to a pattern that only reinforces it. How can my teen gain the most from this experience? So are they going to gain the most from the experience by you giving in to a demand that's, insisting on, threatening self-harm? No. And if I say yes, will it happen more often? Most likely. Am I feeling manipulated, angry, and taken for granted? Yes. What are my fears if I say no? Obviously, if a child is threatening self-harm, that's very frightening. And you have to really have guts to call their bluff and say, this is not cause for that, and I'm not gonna be manipulated by that. If I say yes, will they appreciate what I've done for them? Not if you give in on those terms, right? And what would an empowered parent do? Obviously, in this situation, you've got to hold firm and say, you didn't keep the deal. We're not buying the extravagant present, and I don't expect you to hurt yourself as a result of that. And you are loved. I love you enough to not give into this behavior.
And keeping the focus on them, that they can manage these feelings.
That's right.
So the focus is a very clear yes or no, and just a very straightforward, I believe you can handle this, and I believe you can do better next year.
Right.
And then sometimes there's a follow-up. In this situation, there necessarily wouldn't be a follow-up, but for one of the vignettes we might do, there might be some check-in afterwards. And Barbara, run through what you would do after either that evening or the next day after you've made this decision.
Well, I think asking simple questions is not probing and getting too involved, but just saying, how are you doing? We got school is done. How are you doing? I think being overly either empathic, enthusiastic, preachy, using this as an opportunity to teach, preach, say, I'm so proud of you. You didn't fall apart. It makes the bar so low for what you expect in the way of their behavior that, and they feel it. So to keep it simple, straightforward, and confident in their ability to function.
All right. So again, we're having some people saying things like, I wouldn't parent in that way. I would never offer, an end product for something like that. Great. We hear you on that. But we also had some comments, which is like, yes, this is exactly the situation that I'm in over and over again. So if this isn't a situation that resonates for you, what is going on with your older teen or adult? Are they not getting up in the morning? Can they not keep a job? Will they not go on job interviews? Are they constantly asking you to help them with their college classes and type up their papers? Is it always waiting until the last minute, or they're going to fail the class? What are the issues that are coming up for you, again, with this older teen transition into young adulthood? So anything anyone would care to, talk through with Barbara, how you would go through this process, especially if, again, you're knocking your head against the wall and it's a pattern. One of the things that, just to get people maybe thinking, one of the things that came up in our group was a parent whose son destroyed 2 desks in a rage. And he specifically requested a desk for his, I think for a holiday gift or a birthday,
Or Christmas, or yeah, birthday or Christmas.
birthday present. And this parent was reluctant to buy the desk again. And it was really quite a dilemma for how to go through this process and not just buy the desk, because your child needs a desk to do their schoolwork after destroying 2. So that was a great one we workshopped in our, not workshop, we worked through in our support group. And then there's often the child who won't get out of bed, curtains drawn, sleeps all day, up all night, struggling to take the next step after high school, whatever that might look like for them.
Yeah, I'm seeing something in the chat that someone is saying. Actually, the reality is that adoptive parent, or often people do more for their biological children than their adopted children. So that's also a feeling here in the group. Would anyone like to speak to that feeling or hear that?
And Barbara, before we get to that, I just want to say we're at 3:22. So let's workshop. Someone said, I'd like to hear about the kid that won't get out of bed and go to school. So I had school refusal. That's a great one.
Okay.
That hits home for me. All right. So Susan, are you willing to work with Barbara on this as kind of a role play with her?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
All right. So Barbara, do you want to lead Susan through these questions?
I don't have the wait.
Sure, I'll put them back up so that it's not a surprise to anyone.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, here we go, Susan. So give us a little background. Your child is about how old?
Well, I work with a lot of parents, teenagers, adoptive families, and so let's assume it's a teenager because I've had quite a few parents with this challenge. So let's say 15.
Okay. So
Okay.
around age 15.
Mm-hmm.
And that this is, so let's go through the questions. Is this an exception or a pattern, something you're experiencing?
It's a pattern. Yeah, it's become a pattern. And you want me to just answer the questions?
Yeah, let's go through them.
Okay.
How can your teen gain the most from this experience? This is, well, I don't know if this question really applies to the not getting out of bed situation.
It might. I mean, I think what's stopping a lot of these kids from going to school is anxiety, social interactions, struggling at school. They may have 1 or 2 connected adults, but not always.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Barbara, that this is not necessarily an unrescue mission. What we're looking at is when the parent goes to great lengths to rescue or protect the child from natural consequences of what might happen. I suppose you could start with something like that, but I want to let you know that with my child, she clearly understood the consequences of not going to school. That wasn't anything that was, she was like, yeah, I get it. Her feeling was that it wasn't that she didn't want to learn, she didn't want to go to school. So she was happy to learn and happy to work independently on her own. And just ironically, how sometimes these things that in the moment seem like the worst thing ever, when COVID hit and she in fact had to work on her own over Zoom because everyone was, she looked at me and said, I'm an expert at this.
Right.
And she's like, I know how to do this. All my friends are struggling. I know how to work at home. And she did. So yeah. Again,
You're looking for tools around how to help these parents with basically school refusal, and not wanting to leave home and go to school.
Yeah. And that, oftentimes they're depressed, high anxiety. I mean, it's not so much like obstinate, I don't want to go to school. It's oftentimes really around anxiety is a huge piece.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and sort of a
And-
collapse of not really wanting to participate in the world.
yeah.
So I guess, Barbara, how about we just focus on what an empowered message might sound like with that? How you would talk versus asking these series of questions that might not make quite as much sense. So how would you coach a parent to focus on an empowered message that focuses on their child and a belief in your child?
Yeah, well, I think that the parents need to really think about what's being expressed in the behavior. Obviously, it's anxiety. Anxiety about what? Is the child safe expressing what they're anxious about? Are they getting help, treatment for their depression? Are they working with professionals who know about adoption and who would understand that the child could be grieving, could be mourning their losses, could be afraid to leave home because they're afraid of losing another family or another, they want to stay home where it's safe. Why are they experiencing social anxiety, and what are their feelings about rejection? Why might they be being rejected by other kids? Are they inviting it? Are they encountering it because they're in some way different or struggling and not getting sufficient supports? I think that there's a host of questions.
Right.
that-
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing, we see is I just went to a workshop before that. It's really hard for parents in this area to find therapists who really understand, right, adoption, attachment and stuff. So
Yeah.
parents, and that's, where our organization has come in and tried to help parents, give positive messages and do some things you're saying. But this is definitely one of the big challenges I face. It's, where we haven't been successful often at getting the kid back in school. And the school often isn't trauma informed, right? They're not,
That's right.
you
Yeah.
know, they're
So,
Oh, you froze.
oh, I'm back. Oh, yeah, Susan froze or me?
No, Susan.
like, bad,
Oh.
bad, bad. You didn't do this, not exactly like that, but am I unfroze?
Now you're unfrozen.
Okay.
Well, love to talk to you about our groups and resources for parents, because we are doing lots of things online and by Zoom. And, obviously we have to educate more therapists and more educators about all these issues. But I find if you can give them the 7 core issues to look at, that's a real start for parents and therapists to start thinking about, what's the issue that's going on here.
Right. Yeah, Stacy is listing some really wonderful questions that are, things to think about in the chat. Again, what I'll just share from personal level is like, in addition to therapy, in addition to medication, in addition to me completely changing my parenting style, completely, not taking any lessons from my parents, who I thought did a pretty good job with me and my sister. What really helped was making it her choice to go to school. Not to do schoolwork, but to go to school. And I just said, this is my version of an empowered response. I trust that you'll know when you're ready to return to the school building. And in the meantime, as long as you're keeping up with your academics and doing well, I'm going to trust that you know the right decision to make for you. This is when she was in 10th grade.
Did you have the school getting on you about, like we have in this?
Oh yeah, I had to have,
Oh.
yeah.
Yeah.
I had to have the therapist call the school and tell them that this is not a neglect case
Mhm.
and do not report. Yes. And my therapist had to kind of beg the principal for that.
And that's a beautiful example of giving her some control, right? The mastery and control issue, saying you will know when you are ready. You can take control of knowing when you're ready.
So we're right at time, and I know that these Zoom rooms are being used. I cannot thank everyone enough. What an amazing discussion. A lot of frankness and back and forth and differences of opinions on the chat. I'm gonna pat myself on the back and Barbara on the back that we left room for people to think differently. So thank you all.
Thank you all for coming.